Anxiety also comes from dissociated anger, as does mania, as does psychosis. And I also believe migraines and digestive disorders, insomnia, vertigo. I could go on and on, even autoimmune disorders. I believe all of these, our body is holding on to anger. And that anger, it's invisible. So we kind of think, oh, well, it's gone. It dissipated. It's just as real as this laptop I'm talking to you on, even though we can't see it. And it doesn't go anywhere. I believe it stagnates inside of us and it makes us sick.
We'll make it out and fall in love tonight.
The thing that stood out to us was anger. It's one of those things that it's something that obviously we've got some experience with it, but over the
experience avoiding it, hiding from it, not sure how to.
Yeah. Over the years, it's been something that we both have had a lot of experience with in a variety of ways. And it's always trying to get to the point of trying to understand it in a healthier way. It's the type of thing that we think it's an emotion that's very important. It serves a purpose. It's got all these kind of different things that it's there for a reason. But just like in society, I don't think it necessarily is understood or experienced or processed very well. And that's definitely something that we've experienced in our relationship. So we're really excited to talk to you about it and kind of hear your take on everything. But before we get into all of that, I would love to learn a little bit more about you and kind of how you've gotten to this point in your life and everything like that.
Sure. So I am a therapist. I'm a psychotherapist, but this is my second career. So I didn't go looking to become a therapist. I was very happy. I had already had a master's degree in nutrition and had my career. But as life would have it, I myself fell into a very, very severe depressive episode and thought I was losing my mind. I actually was like physically sick as well from it. And I was desperate to find a good therapist. And I went looking for a good therapist and to no avail because I found plenty of therapists, but not someone who could actually help me understand why I was losing my mind and so sick. And so part of my healing journey for that depressive episode, that was the first out of two. And the second one was much longer and more pernicious. But part of my healing journey for that depressive episode was, I'm here in the therapist chair and I'm thinking, Bronwyn, you are hardly functioning right now, but I still think you would make a better therapist than this person. So I went back to school, got another master's and became a therapist, had to get my 3,000 hours and all that. But so kind of looking back on both my very severe depressive episodes, I realized that they were absolutely the result of suppressed anger, my own, what I call disassociated anger. A lot of times we aren't even aware of the anger we're feeling, and it can be so profound. And anger like that usually comes from a betrayal of sorts, like where someone we have a very high expectation of, like a partner or a parent, someone very close to us, to betray us in some way, where we feel emotionally abandoned or rejected. And so we don't allow ourselves to get angry. We kind of, disassociate from it because we can't handle that. And at that first depressive episode for me, I realize now was my own feelings of betrayal and therefore anger at my husband, because what caused the depression, or kind of the beginning of it, was we had to relocate to another city, which was only an hour and a half away, but it was like the dark side of the moon because I didn't know a single person. I didn't have a job. I left that, in Sacramento, where I was from. My daughter has just entered kindergarten and I was just alone all the time. I mean, I just was so lonely. And he went off to work, and his job is why we had to move, because he got a new job. So one night, just, a few nights into our move, I look over at him and I don't know if I was crying. I don't know what I said. I don't remember. This is like 16 years ago now, but I know I was looking for some empathy, and I know I did not get it. In fact, what I got was the opposite. Like, it was very obvious that he was withholding empathy from me. And we've talked about it since. He felt so guilty. He knew that my loneliness stemmed from his new job and us having to relocate. And so he didn't want to go there. He didn't want to feel more guilty. And so he really, what he did in essence was choose his feelings over mine. And so when he withheld that empathy from me, that triggered little Bronwyn, who, you know, kind of saw the same look of withholding empathy from her mother throughout her whole life, you know, and that just triggered me. And so I fell into a very steep depression. I had like crazy symptoms, like I said, where I was involuntarily vomiting all the time. Like I would be driving and I would just have to vomit in my lap because there's nothing I could do. I'd literally walk down the street and vomit, and people would just stare at me, and it was horrible. It was humiliating. But I realize now that was my own shame being triggered, because we carry shame in our gut. And little Bronwyn felt a lot of shame, as every child does when the parent is neglectful. And we just naturally, as children, conclude, oh, I'm defective. I'm not worth my mom's attunement. Instead of going, oh, that's a mom problem. Mom's depressed, or mom has a personality disorder, whatever. And so that was triggering my shame. And that was where the vomiting, the involuntary vomiting, was coming from. And the other thing that happened, ironically, on the other end of the digestive spectrum, was I could not stop eating during that time. I felt like I had a huge hole in my gut, and I gained like 30 pounds in like 2 months. It was crazy. I was eating day and night. But now I realize that actually wasn't hunger for food. It was like emotional starvation. You know, it triggered little Bronwyn and the emptiness she felt with a mother who did not nurture her. So I realize now, looking back, that if I had just been present in that moment with my husband and looked at him, and when he refused to empathize and see me, if I had the wherewithal to say, you know what, Steve, I know it's hard to admit that I'm hurting right now because that makes you feel guilty, but I need you to choose me right now. I need you just to see me and just validate how lonely I feel and prioritize my feelings right now. And that is what's needed to do. I know he would have done it, but I disassociated from all that. I didn't see what was going on. And so that, you know, greatly affected me. So that's an example of our anger. When we disassociate from it, we get depressed, but we also get anxious. I would say the majority of my clients have anxiety more than depression. I think more women in general might have anxiety, and more men in general might struggle with depression. That's kind of how I see it. But anxiety also comes from dissociated anger, as does mania, as does psychosis. I also believe migraines and digestive disorders, just kind of like what I described, insomnia, vertigo, and I could go on and on. Even autoimmune disorders. I believe all of these, our body is holding on to anger, and that anger, you know, it's invisible. So we kind of think, oh, well, it's gone, you know, it dissipated. You know, it's just as real as this laptop I'm talking to you on, even though we can't see it. And it doesn't go anywhere. I believe it stagnates inside of us, and it makes us sick. And so my goal as a therapist, and this is why I specialize in anger, and I'm an anger expert and have my podcast on anger, is I want to help people learn to connect with their anger, to heal their relationship with anger, so they can learn to channel it out of their bodies in a healthy way, so they don't stagnate and get sick. And that is simply by, you know, assertiveness. So like the example I gave, how I could have said to my husband, hey, what I need is right now is this. And that would have been me channeling out my anger in a very productive way that would have absolutely served everyone. So assertiveness, boundaries is another example, or accountability. And when we start to do that, when we start to heal our relationship with our anger in that way, we heal our relationship with ourselves, because we're no longer betraying ourselves. And I see people kind of come to life when they do that.
Okay.
There's a lot there.
Right?
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think I'll start with this one. The one that's coming up for me is to be able to trust yourself to be angry, because especially if we've had rocky childhoods, and then
Yes.
what we have learned, how we've learned anger was, for me, for how I learned anger was a suppression. And then it came out reactive,
Mhm.
messy. And
Mhm.
so that also fueled the wanting to suppress it more because,
Yeah.
women get angry, they get labeled, loud, they're
Mhm.
crazy, all of these things,
Mhm.
unhinged, all the things that come
Mhm.
with that. And also because I didn't have healthy anger examples, I didn't
Mhm.
know how to express anger in a
Yep.
healthy way. I didn't know that there was healthy anger. I just knew
Right.
that anger was scary. It hurt. It
Mhm.
caused all kinds of problems. And it's taken me, I'm still working on this actively. But when you're talking to somebody about trying to find a healthy anger to release the stagnation out of their bodies and be
Mm.
able to express it in a healthy way where they're not hurting themselves or anybody, but they're so afraid of
Yeah.
anger because they don't know what healthy anger looks like. And so when you're
Yeah.
helping people with that, how do you, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think what makes anger the most scary, Steph, I think what you're probably referring to, and this might be unconscious, but I believe that most of us learned it was scary because at a very young age, probably around age 2, what we call the terrible twos, which I'd like to get away from that title, terrible. I think it's terrible for the parent, not the child. It's a necessary stage of development where the child is starting to differentiate and says, "No, I do it. Me, mine." And if the parent does not have the ego strength to allow that child to have those boundaries and to be assertive, the parent will often kind of threaten abandonment. So that might be through the tone of voice gets kind of clinical and cold. It might be from silent treatment, might be like just, I'm not going to look at you, I'm not going to interact, something like that. And so what we learn implicitly and the little template in our little brains that gets formed is me showing any sign of anger equals abandonment. And once that template is laid, we will carry it with us again, unconsciously, implicitly throughout our lives. And I think that is, kind of the fundamental, what you're alluding to there, Steph, is it is scary because as a little child, we cannot lose our attachment figure. We cannot threaten that. And so we will disassociate from the anger. We will learn, okay, I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to feel it. I'm going to just pretend I'm not because I can't afford to. But then when I do this for my clients, I also do it on my podcast. I lead people through what I call an integration exercise where they integrate with their inner child and they help that inner child know, you know what? I'm your attachment figure now, and I'm not going to threaten to abandon you. And I will be that consistent attachment figure that you can trust. And now that you have me, we don't have to worry about abandonment anymore because I'm not going anywhere. And so that's kind of part of that healing journey is integrating to where we can be true to ourselves in the present.
Oftentimes I try to simplify everything because so many aspects of like healing and processing, and we do a lot of inner child work within the space of like not just our own journeys and our own navigation of the healing journey, but also kind of together, supporting each other as we're doing that process individually. And there's so many times that it's just too convoluted for me. There's just too much. And so I always try to really simplify it and just make it easier, right? I just try to sum everything up really small so then it's easier for me to compartmentalize and understand rather than feeling like it's all of these incredibly overwhelming things. And so I love the idea of just simplifying everything down to anger as the repressed emotion, the repressed
Mm-hmm.
feeling, the thing that's inside that just needs to come out. And I wanted to ask a little bit more. I wanted you to, if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit more to why do you think that it shows up differently in men and women? So you referred to like, you think, you believe that it's men are kind of more depressive with
Mm-hmm.
the way that they show it versus women who are more anxious in the way that they show it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I strongly suspect that men just have more shame in general. And I think it kind of all boils down to little boys aren't allowed to be vulnerable. They're shamed when they cry, usually in our culture. And, when you think about it, a little boy's tears or a little child's tears for that matter is their true vulnerable self. And so that template gets laid for them. Your true vulnerable self equals shame, bad. And so I think they disassociate more from their vulnerable feelings than little girls. Little girls are usually okay to cry. They're not allowed to be angry, though, ironically. And so all my clients who are females, most of them, when they cry, I'm like, are those sad tears or angry tears? And they're like, oh, those are angry tears. I'm like, okay, interesting.
Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Woolly. All of the sponsors of the podcast are products that we actually use and believe in. And Woolly is one of our favorites.
With Valentine's coming up, it is the perfect time to get yourselves a matching pair of woolly fleece.
We love ours. And not only are they stylish and cool, mine also comes with a hood.
Check out these pockets. Oh, real pockets, deep pockets. Can fit my purse in here.
Woolly doesn't just make fleece hoodies. They also have comfortable underwear, socks, pants, shirts, leggings, workout gear.
You name it, you can find it at Woolly.
Right now, because you're a fan of the podcast, you can save 15% on anything at Woolly. Head to the link in our description and be sure to use promo code
Steph and Craig to save 15%.
Woolly. More wool, less plastic.
So it just looks different. But I will say the shame, that stigma that men will have from that, again, that will last a lifetime if it's not unlearned consciously. I think a lot of men, like when they're in a relationship with a woman and the woman's like, hey, you know what? When you say this, it's really hard for me. And maybe you don't realize that. And they're just trying to do like some, feedback. And the man, because there's shame there, the man can't hear what's actually being said. All he actually hears, it's distorted because shame distorts things. Shame's a liar and shame distorts it. And so all he hears is, you suck. You suck so bad. That's all they hear. And then they go, oh my God, you're blaming me. And the woman's like, no, I'm just trying to tell you this one thing. And the man can't hear it. And so shame, I really see as the enemy of humanity, because babies are born into the world with the full gamut of emotions, including anger, but they're not born into the world with shame. Shame is not native to humans. Shame is learned from our social constructs. And so when we learn we have shame, what I really believe it does is it kind of, it separates us from ourselves. It exiles us from our core. And so I mentioned before, shame lives in the gut. Well, you know what else is in the gut is our core self. I really see that. Kind of like, I said when I was just eating all the time, like I was empty at my core. That's my kind of my core essence, myself. And when we dislodge that shame, and I'll give you an example. I actually did this for myself kind of by accident, maybe 4 years ago. I went running one day and I was really kind of ruminating on my own early childhood, because as a therapist, I'm just making all these connections. I'm like, God, all my clients are unlearning the shame of their childhoods. And I just go running one day and all of a sudden I'm at a stoplight. I close my eyes and I see 10-year-old Bronwyn at the dinner table with her dad, who is mocking her, which is what he did every night starting at age 10 until, she went off to college. And I see myself, adult Bronwyn, entering that memory, going to 10-year-old Bronwyn, looking her in the eyes and saying, you know what, little Bronwyn, I know how much shame you feel right now. But you know what? We're going to put all your shame in this big cardboard box. And we're going to return to owner right now, because this belongs to your dad, to our dad, not to us. And we're going to say, here you go, Dad. This is yours. We thought it was ours. You'd like it to be ours, but it never really was. This is yours. You do with it what you will. And so I just did that little imagination exercise for myself on that run, and something within me shifted so deeply and permanently. It was like I was able to kind of fill out my own core, like come into myself. And I started trusting myself and trusting my gut. We say trust our gut. I started trusting my gut. And someone did try to shame me maybe a year after that. And I just saw right through it, like I had never seen before. I just was able to see it so clearly what he was doing. Before that, my whole life, I would just take it in. It would just, I had no membrane. I would just be like, oh my God, I'm shameful. And this time I'm just sitting there going, oh, I see what you're doing. You want me to think I'm the problem. Oh, that's funny because we both know that it's you. And it did not stick to me. It was like I was shame proof, it was so crazy. And so that, again, I want to help other people do that for themselves because shame is a liar and it is not native to us.
I think you're spot on. I can relate so much to that aspect of, like you said, being shamed as a little boy and not being allowed to have emotions and feelings. And I mean, just the whole gamut of everything that, humans experience and exist in. And that same thing too. I mean, that used to happen all the time in our relationship where we talk about it through the lens. We have this little term that we use. We call it trauma ears, where a lot of times if we're activated and Stephanie's trying to talk to me about something or respond to, she's trying to communicate something to me, I'm hearing her through these trauma ears. And all I can hear is that I'm the problem. I made the mistake. I'm a big, fuck up. I'm making all of these mistakes. It's just this intense feeling and I can't even really hear what she's trying to communicate to me. And it's caused a ton of issues over the years until we kind of like really started to hone in and understand what was really taking place. So I completely agree with you. I think it's fascinating to think about it too, where the difference between anger and shame, and yeah, I love it. It's it's sparking a lot inside of my head. Thank you.
Yay, I'm glad.
Yeah, the like it's not like we're familiar with the fact that shame is a learned experience. Shame is something that is given. Shame is something that you said, like we've learned, it's been programmed into, handed down. And that's not new. But I don't think, like, I know that. Like, I know that. And I think so many people know that. But there's a part of a disconnect between what you know and what you feel. And for some reason, like, how when you just hear things and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. The way that you were expressing and explaining how babies are born with all of them, including anger, except for shame. And it just, I don't know, I heard that so differently. It suddenly was like, oh, wait, okay. It gave that separation instead of that I am shameful, that it gives you that little breathing space. So you just express that so well. And I'm wondering if, like,
it takes, there's so many times
I'm in a moment, like, right? I'm like, oh, that was good. I think I feel like it's like my belly heard it and was like, huh, like how you say little me. I just like heard that. I'm like, oh, this isn't me. This is, even though I've been trying to express it, I couldn't experience it. And the way you said it, I was like, oh, okay. Oh, I hear that. I feel that. It was neat. Okay.
Wow.
I'm going to be here for a minute.
Baby Steph heard that.
Yeah. Yes. So thank you for explaining it that way and expressing it that way.
Absolutely.
Ooh.
The way that you're talking about it, Bronwyn, too, is, I mean, all of these things, these are huge, big, not just emotions, but these are really big, issues for people. I think we could probably sum up a lot of the struggles that I've experienced over the course of my life with those two things, anger and shame, repressing my emotions, feeling ashamed about everything, internalizing all of those things as I'm the problem and I'm the issue and, all of those kind of things. So you're talking about it in a very direct, simple way of like, this is what it is. And yet I know from my lived experience that it's not that easy to kind of shift and change and just, immediately have these, oh, okay, that's a great example where, Steph is, these are things that we very much believe, that we've experienced, that we've been healing, that we've been changing and working on
this for years.
And sometimes it's like the 15th, 20th, 100th time that we hear something when it finally clicks. And so from your experience, like, how do we help people in that process of, something as simple as the way that you're describing it, where it's like, okay, it's just the repressed anger. Shame is really not yours. It belongs to whoever put it on you.
Yeah.
How do we help them navigate that so that they can have these real big shifts?
Yes, I think it really needs to be experiential. A lot of therapy, unfortunately, is just like head talk, and we're up here. This is where our adult self lives. This is not going to go far. We need to go to our inner child, which is in our body. And our bodies are always trying to communicate to us, like as in our inner children or inner child is always trying to communicate to us. So I really believe it needs to be experiential. So that's kind of why I was saying the same exercise I gave you guys that example of that I just did while I was running, I talk listeners through on my podcast. I call that episodes just called Dislodging Shame Residue. Shame is a residue. So shame is a sticky residue that is left by everything we would call trauma. And I really want to make sure neglect is thrown in there, because neglect does not get enough press. Neglect is just as traumatic as anything else. In fact, I think it's more so, because if you have bruises on your body as a kid, you have all of society rallying around you, being like, oh my God, your dad's a monster. And you have like this validation, and you just know it's wrong and you don't deserve it at some level. But if you are neglected, it's so insidious. You're just like, oh, I guess I'm just not worth the attention. I guess I'm just not important. And it's just so snaky and sneaky. And so shame is the residue from all of that. It's also the residue from kind of like innocuous, what we would say innocuous experiences, like, if we're age 3 and our younger sibling is born and suddenly we lose all of our parents' attention. Of course we do, because a newborn takes over. I mean, a newborn just takes all the attention just by nature. And so it's not like the parent is doing anything, quote, wrong, but to a 3-year-old, it feels like, oh, I guess I'm not enough. I guess I lost their attention. And they take it as that's a me problem. And so we need to unlearn all those things. And we need to do these integration exercises with our inner child to help them see the truth, help them to unlearn that, and to know that now they're free because they have us, that we, our adult self, will be that consistent, trustworthy attachment figure who validates their anger, who validates all their feelings, who never abandons them. And we need to apologize to them for abandoning them in the first place, for treating them the same way our parents treated us, neglecting them the same way we were neglected. We need to, rebuild and repair that relationship. And so, yeah, I think it has to be experiential. And once that happens, I mean, there's a lot of different triggers and different times of life we have to do that for, but each exercise, you just do it once and it's just there to stay. It's really powerful. And people, like I said, people come alive. I have never seen that before. And I'm more alive than I ever have been. And I'm 54 now. I just feel like, wow, what was I doing for the first 50 years of my life? It's just, I feel really alive. I feel so happy. So for example, one thing just that I did maybe 2 years ago now is I had to cut off my father. And it was right when my mother was dying that I concluded, like, oh my God, he is so toxic. And I gave him an ultimatum to apologize, to own it, and to become a safe person. He did not take me up on that. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess we can't have a relationship. But the minute I did that, I started sleeping like a baby. And I had struggled previously with insomnia for about 30 years, on and off, but mostly on, a lot of on. And I really believed that like little Bronwyn was trying to wake me up by not letting me sleep, going, wake up. Like, what are you doing? You're betraying us. What are you doing? Get out of this relationship. And I think the minute my eyes were opened and I finally stopped betraying myself is when I was just able to be completely at peace at night. And so I was able to discontinue all the medication I was on, and I sleep like a baby. It's amazing.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could speak on, because this is something that we've experienced in our relationship a lot, is just projecting everything all over each other, right? a lot of these pent up things from childhood, all of this
Yeah.
stuff that is repressed just comes out and gets thrown across, each other in one way, shape, or form. And so I wonder if you could speak to that, and not even just the projection that we'll do to partners, but also to, the external people around us, all kind of relationships as a whole, and the way that it kind of manifests.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I still do that with my husband. I'm just now realizing how I implicitly expect him to be the perfectly attuned attachment figure that I never had. I'm expecting him to compensate for my parents, right? And that is hard. We do project. We do want our current attachment figure to compensate for what we didn't have, or we want to prove to ourselves through this attachment figure that we really are lovable to our original attachment figure. So
we have a new podcast sponsor, and it's one that I'm really excited about. It's Nutrotonic, and they make authentic Himalayan Shilajit. I've been aware of Shilajit for several years, but hesitant to try any of them because there's a lot of fake ones on the market. But when Nutrotonic reached out and wanted to partner with us, I thought I'd give it an honest try. Well, I've been using it for several months now, and I have to say I love it. Nutrotonic is the only brand to sell rare red Shilajit, which is the most healing, it's high in fulvic acid, and it's the most effective type of Shilajit on the market for boosting testosterone, blood circulation, and overall balance of your hormones, all of which reduce common intimacy issues like ED, low libido, and can even help with menopause symptoms. The other cool thing about Nutrotonic is their Shilajit comes in a couple of different options for you. I went with the resin, which I'm a huge fan of. They've also got drops and gummies. Right now, listeners of the podcast can save 15% on anything at their website. Head to the link in our description and be sure to use promo code Steph and Craig to get that 15% off. Nutrotonic, authentic, rare, red Himalayan Shilajit. Give it a shot. You're going to love it. Hold on. I want you to say that again. I want to, there was something in that. If you wouldn't mind, break that down a little bit more.
Yeah. So I believe we seek out attachment figures in our present that actually echo our parent, one or both of our parents, in a number of ways. And it's like we're trying to prove to ourselves, I can finally win the love of this parent. I can finally win the approval of this parent through our present attachment figure. So I'll give you another example. And I've shared this, very vulnerable information on my podcast, but I, really struggled with flirting for a long time. And I'd be like, why do I do this? And I realized I don't even like this person. I just want them to like me. That's all I want is I want to prove that I'm likable. And then one day I realized I'm trying to win the love of my father. Oh my God, he's like a stand-in for my father. And I'm trying to get that approval by being funny and witty and cute. Oh my God. And the minute I realized that, I felt no more compulsion to flirt. I was just at complete peace. So that's an example of what we do in our present.
Yeah.
Right. I want to back up to you're talking about the way that we show up for ourselves, for our younger selves, and how we have that conversation and I'm here, I'm not going to abandon you.
Yes.
And that takes an extreme amount of trust, rebuilding that trust. And most of the time when we're experiencing a large amount of shame and we have all of this history that we were gifted and then we learned how to recreate over and over again into our own lives to validate it, we lose trust of ourselves. We lose complete trust.
Yes.
And so rebuilding trust in yourself is it's a process that takes a while. How would you help somebody in that space that says, well, I don't even know if I can't trust myself that I'll be there for myself?
Yeah. I actually would have to disagree that it takes a long time. I think it can happen very quickly. What we need to do is apologize to our inner child. And I think, just if our own parents were to finally apologize to us, we'd be like, I forgive you. Let's have a great relationship now. We would be so on board. If they apologized to us, they owned it, what they did, and they became a safe person. I think every child their whole life longs for that. And I think our inner child is just jumping at the bit to forgive us when we finally come clean and admit what we've done and, say, I want to win back your trust and I ask for your forgiveness. And, I'm here now. I think that happens very, very quickly, actually. And as we dislodge that shame, we do trust ourselves. Shame is what stops us from trusting ourselves.
Well, do you want to go? Like, you're having a moment with that.
No,
like,
you're good. Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to bounce back here just a little bit, because you have somebody who's experienced a lot of apologies that had no weight. So the empty apologies that I'm sorry, so you're not mad at me right now, but then the behavior doesn't change. So we understand how those empty apologies come in, but when that is something that, like, we'll take New Year's, for example, the New Year's resolutions, everybody, it's really hard to not break promises that you make to yourself until you start to learn that behavior. And so it's like, okay, here we go. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to do this. And you put all this on and then you don't. And as soon as you do, you recreate the story of, I did it again. I failed again. And that trust gets broke. So how, with that dynamic, like, it would be great. I would love this, but that doesn't quite click for me. Can you try and go into that a little bit more when you've proven to yourself over and over again?
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a really good facet that I maybe overlooked. So yes, the I'm sorry, but when you think of those apologies, those aren't real apologies anyway. Those aren't. Anyone can say, I'm sorry. Talk is cheap. It's, a real apology says, Steph, here's what I did. And I know how much that hurt you. I know how much you felt rejected by me and alone. It really names the whole experience. That's a real apology. And then it says, I don't blame you for being angry. And I'm going to ask your forgiveness, and I'm going to work to win back your trust. And here's how. So a true apology does do the whole gamut. I'm sorry. No, that means nothing. You're right. It's meaningless. But that said, with, an inner child, you would say all that. And then you'd say, your feelings matter to me. And I'm going to make them my priority. I'm going to listen. I'm going to attune to you, because your feelings tell us what you need. And that's my job. That is my responsibility. And I have failed you in that way. I have not validated your feelings. I have not met your needs. I have betrayed you. But I'm going to start attuning to you. I'm going to listen to your feelings, and I am going to meet your needs. And then you do it. So yes, that's the real. I'm glad you helped me kind of augment that.
Thank you for explaining that a little bit more and deeper. And I love how, like, that breaking it down, the authenticity of it making such a difference. And for me, I would have to add, and I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to make mistakes along the way, and I'm going to get it wrong. But when I do, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to come back to you, to the accountability, and I'm going to keep trying, but not, just that really, oh my gosh, I'm stumbling on my words. It's, one of the things that gets on is, like, perfection is the only acceptable outcome 100% of the time. And you get, like, you get stuck in that. So as soon as you're not 100% nailing it, then you teeter off, and you're like,
maybe I would, I would add then to little Steph, I would say, little Steph, you know what? I love that you are human. And I'm sorry that I have had unrealistic expectations of you your whole life. I am sorry that I have expected you to be a little doll or a little robot. And I realize that. And now I want to let you know that I prioritize your feelings. I will meet your needs, and I respect your natural human limitations. And I will respect your natural limits and boundaries. And I'm going to be human. I'm going to make lots of mistakes. And I'm realizing those are not shameful. Mistakes are not shameful. Humans make loads of mistakes, but if we don't give in to the lie of shame, we learn from them. And that's what I want to do. I want to make lots of mistakes and learn from every one of them and do better.
I love that. We had one where it was talking about trying to teach yourself, like making mistakes on purpose and allowing your reaction,
That
like
was so
like
fun. Yeah.
spilling water and just doing,
Yeah.
like dumping a cup over and being
Yeah,
like,
we would like
it's
accidentally
okay.
be like, "Oh, I spilled milk," and you're like,
Right?
"Yeah, it's okay. You can spill
It's
milk.
like,
It's not a big deal." And then we just clean it up and move on. And over the years, we've had all of these like little aha moments of awareness of trying to incorporate some form of like inner child healing in the
yeah,
scope of our relationship, so that it's this nice little safe container to
yeah.
kind of reparent some of these parts of ourselves over the years, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because yes, mistakes are human. They are not shameful. They are absolutely not. And that's it's such a good reminder for everybody listening. Like you're allowed to make mistakes. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal to really feel that in your belly. Go spill the water on purpose. It feels good. Go spill the milk.
A lot of what we've done, Bronwyn, has come through our relationship. So like the path for us when it comes to healing and really the growth and everything like that is within the container of this relationship. It hasn't always been that way. We've gone through various stages of chaos and tumultuous, you
Yeah.
name it, and we've gone through it. But it's really been the thing that has helped both of us heal a lot of stuff from childhood
Mm.
and get to certain points in our life where things are just going so much better and
Mm.
life is so much better and all these kind of things. But what would you say to people that don't have that committed relationship, that don't have that safe container with a partner? I mean, I know it's still possible. I know it's still out there that it's not like you have to have I think that all of these wounds, traumas, everything like that. I also want to come back to neglect too. I thought that was a really key thing that I wanted to, sorry, this just popped in my head. But anyways, what about the person that doesn't have a safe relationship to kind of heal within? What are some
Yeah.
ways that they can still find
Well, I think
peace?
the good news is we don't need that. We need to do that for ourselves. That's our relationship with us. That's the healed, safe container and relationship. And when we integrate, the word integrate, if you remember from school, integral numbers are whole numbers. We become whole, we become complete, we become consistent, we become mature, all those things. So when we become whole, it's funny, we actually find that we're able to cut people out of our life that we would turn a blind eye to in the past because we were desperate not to be alone. But all of a sudden, we're not like desperate anymore because we're not alone anymore. And we're like, okay, I can let go of this relationship. I can let go of this. And then the few people we still, allow the privilege to stay in our lives, they're just a bonus.
Okay. Neglect. I like that you brought that up earlier, and I want to swing back to it because it made me really think about, we grew up during the 80s, so we come from this generation where it was like latchkey kids and we were home by ourselves a lot, and our parents were, both parents were out of the house working and everything like that. And I had, there's some part of me, and there's this whole thing out there too where people, that's almost like a badge of honor that people will carry, where it's like, we had to figure out things ourselves and we had to do these. And I think it's the way that we've spun it in a sense in order to push away from the reality of like, it was neglect. And yeah, the circumstances and all those kind of things of everybody's life and parenting and raising kids and trying to come up with income and all those kind of stuff. But at the same time, I feel like it was incredibly detrimental. I know for me personally, it was like, I hated when I was home by myself. Do you know what I mean? Just being home alone, even now as an adult, is still really challenging for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I was a latchkey kid too. I didn't mind being home by myself, but what I cannot tolerate even now is silence. So I always have the music playing. Like my husband, my daughter can tell you, like the music's always playing. Like it's so triggering. And I realize that silence to me equals rejection. So even though my parents were home, it was like I was invisible, and that hurt. That's that's also neglect, right? And so when the parents are gone, that's neglect. But then when they're there and they're still neglecting you, which I'm sure did happen for you guys, because then it wouldn't have been so tragic if they came home and were like, oh my God, Craig, I just couldn't wait to get home. And I'm so curious how your day was. You told me this was going to happen. How'd that go? That's not neglect. So it's not really quantity, it's quality. And that's what I think our parents, I want to say on one end of the spectrum to give them the best benefit of the doubt is they just didn't know how important it was. There just wasn't the level of parental knowledge that there is starting to be today, or focus on mental health. Obviously, that didn't exist, or psychology or whatever. But on the other end, they are human, and they knew they needed it as kids, and they knew how much they even need it as adults, and they still chose to withhold it from us. We don't need, a parenting educator to teach us what we just intuitively know, because we're human and we know that we need the light of a parent's face. We need interest. We need concern. We need to feel acknowledged. And they didn't do it.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Heritage Still. When we got married, we combined all of our pans together.
All of our really old, scratched up, crappy nonstick pans.
And we used those for years. Right up until the point where we learned that, turns out, those were probably killing us or giving us all cancer. So we ditched those pans and we went with titanium stainless steel pans from Heritage Still.
These pans can be used on any cooktop. They're oven safe and they're easy to clean.
Heritage Still is located right here in Tennessee. So you're getting American-made, fine, premium cookware for less. On top of that, you get a lifetime warranty.
And listeners of the podcast can save 10% over at Heritage Still.
Their website is heritagestill.us/Steph and Craig. Again, that's
heritagestill.us/Steph
and Craig. Save 10% at Heritage Still.
But it really doesn't matter, how unconscious or conscious it was, because even if it was completely unconscious, it has the same effect on the child, and so that's what we have to unlearn, and we have to allow ourselves to feel the anger at them. We have to allow that to happen. So that is what, ideally happens during the terrible teen years. Now we're talking about the terrible twos and the teens, is that child differentiates, and differentiation entails actively rejecting the parent, comparing the parent to their friends' parents, comparing the parent to other adults that they see at school or where have you. And the parent's going to get, slighted. The parent's going to get rejected, put down. The eyes are going to roll, whatever. And that's really important, because that child is differentiating. They are saying, I'm not you, I'm not you, I'm not you. And they need to go through that. That is imperative for them to do. But very few children do that really in a healthy way, because the parent usually doesn't allow for it. Again, it could be partly that they just don't know the importance, but it's also their fragile egos that just can't handle it. And so the parent will often reject the child and abandon the child emotionally and reject the child back and shame the child. And so it hurts the child. And so, by the time we're adults, we haven't really successfully differentiated, because we weren't allowed to during the time we really needed to. And so we go to therapy, and that's what we're doing. We're finally differentiating, which doesn't mean physical space from the parent, because the parent could be deceased and we're still not differentiated. So it has nothing to do with proximity. It has everything to do with finally distinguishing ourselves. And that's where our anger needs to be, unleashed. We don't need to ever confront the parent directly. And in most cases, that would be counterproductive. So I'm not an advocate for that. But we do need to externalize that anger out of our bodies. It could be in fantasy. It could write a fantasy letter, dear mom, dear dad, and then validate it and have someone else validate it for us. So we can still do that for ourselves. And that is how we finally differentiate. But it does require us feeling that anger and oftentimes disgust.
Oh, well,
right.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking of how much I continued that dynamic as a parent, not just like how, what it was like, but how I continued that dynamic, and how much there was the unconscious part of it where I was so tired and didn't know how to show up and just couldn't. And it's like when I got home, instead of being able to show up, it was like, okay, now I'm checking out, and how checked out I was as a parent, and how much I missed, and how much they miss because of it. And also the teenagers that you're talking about, where they're pushing back and they're trying to have that separation, that their self energy growing with that. And for me, that scared me so bad because I was afraid, well, the rejection, like, I'm not you. And what I saw was, you're making the same mistakes I did. You're going down the same path. And all I could see, and I was like, please, like, don't, because I don't want you to be like me. And they're like, I'm not like you. And I'm like, you're doing the same things. And when you could pull them in and like ground them, they couldn't leave. It was like, oh, you could finally breathe because you knew they were safe. And I'm just thinking how, like, you know, you go through so much when you're looking at all of the inner child healing and all of the things that little you experienced. And then as you start really looking at it, then you look at, oh, this is how I parented. It didn't look like this, but now I see what this actually was. And this was really bad. There was so much neglect that I didn't see as neglect, because there was a house, there was roof, there was food, there was water, there was school clothes. You had, which is basic needs. That's not, you know, but that was like, okay, they're safe. Now I can, and then it was just a shutdown point. And so they're getting the message, you don't want to be around me. You don't like me. And that's heartbreaking. That's so heartbreaking. Sorry, go ahead.
You're okay. You're okay. I want to ask you, Bronwyn, how can we help our adult children who might still be struggling with the differentiation process? How can we support them with that as, you know, current versions of parenting? You know, like, how can we help our kids now, Bronwyn, differentiate from us?
Yeah. And you know what? I identify with you guys so much. I just have one child. She's 21 now. And I also want to just put it out there, like, my daughter, her name is Edie. She started differentiating from me at age 5, because when I fell into that depression, went from that move, she felt absolutely abandoned by me. And she was absolutely emotionally abandoned by me. And she went from being the apple of my eye to, like, you know, she didn't exist. And that's when I felt her differentiate from me. And she, like, was pretty hostile starting at that age until about 2 years ago. We had a horrific relationship, and I was so depressed during so much of that time. And she was a big part of that. And I did not have the ego strength for her pushing away from me, because with my own depression, it was too much. And I said things that I will never forget, and I wish I didn't say. So I just want to put it out there. We're all human. We are all human. We're in this together. But the good news is, so a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I started, like, putting it together. Okay, this all started when I emotionally abandoned her, when I first fell into that first depressive episode, because that's when she just changed with me, her relationship, her rapport with me. And so I wrote her a letter called Dear 5-Year-Old Edie. And I just wrote in that letter, like, I think you felt really rejected by me, really abandoned by me. And I don't blame you. And you know what? I wish right now I could just sit you on my lap and hold you and comfort you and just kiss you all over your face and let you know that was 100% a mom problem and 0% an Edie problem. The reason you were rejected by me, which you were, was a me problem, little Edie, not a you problem. And so I wrote her that. I didn't say anything. I just sent it to her. I just sent it. I didn't even bother to say, because I knew she'd be like, I don't want to read it, you know, whatever. So I didn't follow up about it. I just pretended like I knew nothing. And then I noticed she started warming up to me more. She didn't bring it up. And then I kind of just started learning to be a listener and stop talking. Just shut up and listen. And I'm not going to ask you questions you don't want to answer. I'm not going to get upset if you don't talk to me. I'm not going to pick the subject matter. If you don't want to talk, I'll just sit here in silence, which still triggers me to this day. But I learned, okay, it's worth tolerating for her. So I'll just be silent with her. And if and when she speaks, she does, I'm all ears. And over time, between those two things, she just started talking to me more. And I just really validated all her feelings. I listened to her. Some of what she talked about was, the horrible things I did and said during those 14 years. And I just said, you're right. I don't blame you. I bet you felt so betrayed by me when I did that in front of those people, whatever. And just little by little, we have completely healed our relationship. Like, it's better now than I ever thought it could be. So there is so much hope, but we do need to apologize. We do. And we need to do just like what I said with the inner child. It's not just I'm sorry. We need to initiate and say, I imagine you felt this, this, and this because I did this. Like, we need to name everything. And if we're wrong, they'll correct us. They'll say, it was actually this. We'll say, okay, well, I don't blame you for being mad about that. So we just take the lead. We initiate, we name it all. You know what? I bet you're still angry with me. Do you want to share more? Like, I just want to hear about it. Like, what was that like for you? And we just become a listener and we just validate and we just earn back their trust slowly over time. And it helped for her to know how depressed I was because she didn't realize the level of depression I was in. And, but we don't lead with that. We don't lead with, let me intellectually tell you what I was struggling with. No, we lead with, what was it like for you? And then eventually we'll get to, if they're ready to hear it, this is where I was at. And this is why I was not myself during that time. But that's at the very tail end of the process.
Well,
yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah,
that's great. That gives a real good starting point, or a continuing point, because wherever you're at in the journey as a parent, because if you're a parent, guaranteed, you're here somewhere on the journey. We don't get through it without messing up. No. So you're somewhere on this journey, and whether you're on the healing phase of it or how do I even begin to heal, hopefully you're at least on that spot.
I'm all fired up inside. I'm like, I want to There's so many little nuggets today, Bronwyn. Thank you so much. There's been so many little things that have just sparked so much stuff. I love the idea of how simple, like for Steph, apologies have all the baggage that she's got wrapped around them and all the story, and baggage is the wrong word, babe, but all the stuff that she's
Steph
got
has baggage.
Yeah.
But that made so much sense to me of how simple that is to just be like, because I'm constantly doing work with my inner child. It's this 5-year-old version of Craig that just is, I'm there now. I'm the guy that's showing up for him all the time. And I love the idea of just how simply, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm just sorry that happened. I'm sorry that I abandoned. I'm sorry that all of those things took place. And that simplicity is so huge. I wanted to talk about, or I wanted to get your take on, because we post a lot of content about inner child healing and the importance of it. And truthfully, I think it's how you eventually get to the spot where you are able to kind of reintegrate and fully heal, and life starts to actually become what you want it to become, right? But 9 times out of 10, we get so much pushback out there on social media from people that all those stereotypes of like, grow up, get over it, nobody cares about this, all those things that people will have. And so how do you help the person who is really resistant to some of this stuff, right? Really resistant to the idea of, well, that's in my past, or there, I had a great childhood. There was nothing from my childhood, or how do we help that individual really see and understand that you might not have had like the most traumatic, difficult, abusive childhood, but there's always going to be stuff there. There's always going to be anger. There's always going to be shame. There's always going to be these components that need to be felt and processed. How do you help somebody navigate that so that they eventually can get to that spot where they can start unlocking some of this?
Yeah. Well, if they're saying like the major pushback, like you quoted, which grow up, get over it, whatever, I get to be a little sarcastic, and I just say, this sounds really evocative for you to hear. Like, you don't want to acknowledge something. This sounds like it's hitting some denial for you. And if you want to look into that, that would be good. But I don't want to hear what you're trying to put me down for now. That's not okay. Because that's really what you're running into is people's denial.
Yeah.
And that comes from shame. So you could even like kind of just name that, like, I know this is really triggering for a lot of us to kind of admit how painful our childhood was, and it can trigger a lot of shame. And I used to be the same way. And I hope that you're able to see that there's no shame,
And then what do you find are some common, like, not necessarily roadblocks, but when somebody that starts to unpack this, especially around anger and processing anger, and what are some common things that will kind of get people caught up to where they'll fall back into the patterns and the cycles around it? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Element 6. E6 is a local company right here in Tennessee, and they happen to manufacture some of the best pickleball paddles you're going to find. If you're just getting into pickleball, or if you're a professional, E6 has you covered. All of their paddles are engineered with advanced technology and some of the latest materials in the pickleball game. They offer free shipping and returns, and right now, listeners of the podcast can save 10% on anything at their website. Head to the link in our description and be sure to enter in the promo code Steph and Craig. Get out there, get on the courts, and come play some pickleball with us. Element 6, premium pickleball paddles for your pickleball journey.
I think the number one thing that comes to mind right now is, and this again, I think is more common with females than males, but it's not exclusive, but a lot of us as children were conditioned by the parent to attune to them. So it's a reversal of nurture, actually. So maybe mom didn't really nurture or attune to us, but she expected us to be responsible for her feeling, right? And or dad. And so I'll find that that's a huge roadblock for an adult who's seeking to heal, and they'll just keep excusing the parent. They'll just say, well, she's a product of her time. She didn't know better. And I'm like, yeah, that's your denial. And that comes from, you since infancy being conditioned to feel responsible for her feelings. You learned to have all this empathy for her, but but none for you. And you learned that your feelings don't matter, but hers do. And that's what's showing up now. And what that serves is as a defense mechanism against their own being able to connect with their own anger at the parent. And so we have to see that, we have to name that, and we have to help unlearn that. And that requires getting angry at the parent for teaching us that, for conditioning us that we are responsible for their feelings, but they're not responsible for our feelings, that we're supposed to empathize for them, but they don't for us. We need to be able to say, that's fucked up. We need to be able to get to that place to heal.
I really want to hone in on that, because there is a lot of times that, we'll see this online and on social all the time, where people always want to throw in those big caveats of our parents were doing the best that they could, they came from a generation of, parenting, and all of those kind of things, which I obviously are true, obviously are applicable, obviously have importance when you're looking at the totality of the big picture. But how important is the process of really being able to express it, name it, feel it, get angry about it?
Yeah.
I mean, from my personal experience, had I not been able to do that,
Yes.
I know I would still be stuck in all of those same toxic patterns
Yeah.
and all of those same cycles.
You would.
Could you just speak a little bit about how, you can't skip that part of the healing process?
No, you cannot skip that. That's really what I was getting at with differentiation. When you're able to name it, to feel it, to get angry, to channel that anger out of your body, or even the disgust out of your body with words, you're differentiating. And you need to do that to be whole. There's no integration or wholeness without differentiation. They are two sides of the same coin. We will never be whole if we are undifferentiated. We will never differentiate if we don't integrate. Those have to go together, and those require living in reality and stop living in denial. So it's not easy for some people. I'm not going to say that it is. And sometimes they're just not ready for it. But there will be probably a time in their life, a crisis that will be created at some point where they have to hit bottom. And hitting bottom is when we wake up, oftentimes. It's no guarantee, but the good thing about, going through really, really hard times is that it undermines everything else. And we will be forced to a point where we have to wake up to reality, so yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of time, but that's usually kind of how it goes.
Bronwyn, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful chat. It's been really insightful for myself. Like, I'm very, very excited I do all the editing and everything. So I'm excited to go back and put this all together because there's so many components and pieces that I'm excited to listen to again. Your podcast is Angry at the Right Things, or Angry at All the Right Things, right?
Angry at the Right Things. Yeah.
Angry at the Right Things. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to throw out or share with our listeners?
I just want to say life is too short to betray ourselves. It's just too short. We need to be true to ourselves. And that is not a selfish thing inherently, because when we learn to stop betraying ourselves, when we learn to trust ourselves, to be true to ourselves, we flourish. And if you look at like a flourishing tree, a tree that flourishes creates shade. It creates habitat for thousands of little critters. It creates fruit for so many people. It benefits the whole world. And so we need to not see those things as selfish whatsoever.
Beautiful. Well, we wrap every episode with, you ready, babe?
Ready.
Expect the best.
Plan for the greatest.
We'll see everybody next time.
We got a wild ride. Wait and see, you and me. We were meant to be.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. You've made it all the way to the end, and we are so grateful for you. If you have a moment, you could take time to like, subscribe, and share this episode. It really helps us. And also, if you liked this episode, which you're still here, so you probably did, you might like these clips too. And again, thanks for supporting the Steph and Craig Show. There's new episodes every week. See you next time.